The 8th nanny quit at 6:20 on a Tuesday morning, standing in the front hall of the Rosedale house with her boots in her hands. Because the boys had filled them with water the night before, and set them out on the stone balcony, where the January air did the rest. Adrian Fenwick was still wearing his overcoat. He'd come off a red-eye from Halifax 90 minutes earlier, and he had not yet taken off his shoes, and the woman in front of him, a competent unflappable woman who had lasted 11 days, which was above average, was holding 2 blocks of ice shaped like footwear and crying without making any noise at all. "I've worked with difficult children," she said. "I want you to understand that. I've worked with children who bite. I'll pay for new boots." "That isn't." She stopped. She looked at the staircase, at the second-floor landing where 2 identical faces were watching over the banister, unblinking, waiting. Then she looked back at him, and something in her expression rearranged itself into pity, which was worse than the crying. "They don't want a nanny, Mr. Fenwick," she said. "They want you to notice." She left the boots on the marble. Adrian stood there long after her taxi pulled away, listening to the eavesdropping tick as the ice moved in it, and he thought about how many things in his life he could purchase within the hour, and how none of them had ever included another human being's patience. Upstairs a door closed. Then a second door, a beat later, like an echo that had learned to lag on purpose. The twins were 10. They had been 9 when their mother left, and 8 when she started staying at the office late, and 7 when she stopped coming to their hockey games at the arena off Mount Pleasant, though nobody in the house had been keeping that particular ledger except apparently them. Miles Fenwick was 4 minutes older and used it. Everett Fenwick was 4 minutes younger, and made up the difference in nerve. Together they had in 14 months, driven out 8 caregivers, 3 tutors, 1 child psychologist and a woman from an agency in Yorkville who had arrived with a laminated behavior chart and left with a broken thumb, which even the boys insisted was an accident, and which Adrian, in a corner of himself he did not examine, suspected actually was. Every stunt asked the same question. Adrian did not understand that yet. He thought they were asking what can we get away with. He would learn much later, standing in a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning, that they had only ever been asking, "How long before you go to?" The letter from Vivienne Fenwick's lawyers arrived that same week, couriered, thick as a paperback. He read it in his office on the 41st floor with the harbor spread out below him, the lake ice pushed up in gray slabs against the breakwater. His ex-wife was seeking primary custody. She had moved to Geneva with a man who did something with private banking, and she had spent 11 months not phoning her sons, and now there were 41 pages explaining that the household Adrian Fenwick maintained was, in the careful language of family law, an environment of chronic instability. 8 nannies in 14 months, it was right there in paragraph 9. They had counted, somebody had counted. Adrian sat with the pages in his lap, and felt the particular vertigo of a man who has spent 20 years being right about tonnage and birth fees and diesel futures, and who has just discovered that the only figure anyone will ever hold against him is the number of strangers he hired to raise his children. His mother, Rosemary Fenwick, phoned that night from her condo in Yorkville to say that she had spoken to the agency, and that the agency had, in the phrasing she used, stepped back. "Blacklisted," Adrian said. "Nobody said blacklisted." "What did they say?" A pause. "Ice, somewhere in a glass. They said the boys need more than a nanny. They need their mother, Adrian." His mother's voice went thin and precise, the way it did when she was about to be honest, which she permitted herself roughly twice a year. "They needed her. Now they need you. There's a difference. And it isn't the one you keep pretending it is." He hung up and stood in the dark kitchen, and a piece of bread over the sink like a man in a rented room. 2 days later a woman came up the front walk in a parka the color of wet concrete, with a canvas bag over her shoulder and a boy holding the hem of her coat. Her name was Delphine Cardinal. She was 41. She had come through a small agency in Scarborough that had not yet heard about the Fenwick house, or had heard and needed the placement fee anyway, and she stood in the front hall with snow melting off her boots onto the marble, and did not look at the chandelier, which was the first unusual thing about her. Everyone looked at the chandelier. "I clean," she said. "I cook if you want cooking. I don't do childcare." Adrian, who had rehearsed a sentence about flexibility, closed his mouth. "The agency told me about the boys," she said it evenly. "They also told me 8 women have come through here since last spring. That's not a discipline problem. That's a grief problem, and I'm not qualified to fix it, and neither are they. So I'll clean your house." Behind her, half hidden, the boy watched Adrian with enormous dark eyes and said nothing at all. "Your son, Ezra." She put her hand on the boy's head without looking down, the way you touch something you always know the exact position of. "He's 6. Tuesdays and Thursdays he's in school in the afternoon, and my sister takes him mornings. When there's a PA day he comes with me or I don't come. That's the arrangement, or there's no arrangement." He should have said no. He had a merger closing in 6 weeks with a family-owned shipping line out of Halifax, and a custody response due, and a house that had become a kind of weather system. What he said was, "Can you start Monday?" She started Monday, and the house got clean. In a way it hadn't been clean in years. Not the aggressive, resentful cleanliness the agencies delivered, but something quieter. Shoes lined up. The dead poinsettia gone from the sunroom. The photographs on the piano dusted and, he noticed on the third day, subtly rearranged so that the one of the boys at 4, both of them mid-shriek in a waiting pool at the cottage on Georgian Bay, sat where you'd see it first. She did not speak to the twins. She did not scold them or bribe them or attempt eye contact. When Miles left a marble on the second stair, the old trick, the classic, she picked it up, put it in the pocket of her apron, and went on wiping the banister, and something about that unbothered efficiency clearly enraged him, because he stood at the top of the stairs for a full minute waiting for a reaction that never came. She lasted 3 weeks before the boys turned their attention to the things she loved. It was a PA day in the last week of January. Adrian remembered afterwards that the sky had that low tin color Toronto gets before a real storm, and that he had come home at 4 in the afternoon for the first time in a year and a half, because his lawyer, a shrewd tired man named Hugh Marchetti, had told him bluntly that the court would want to hear about his schedule, and it would be nice if the schedule contained his children. He came in the side door and saw the mud first. That was the thing. He always thought about that afterwards, how the house told him before anyone did. A trail of boot prints across the hallway tile, ravine mud, the reddish clay you only get down by the creek at the bottom of the property. 2 sets small, tracking away from the back door and up the hall toward the lounge, and someone smaller, in sock feet, had walked through them after, and those prints went the same way. He stood there with his coat on and his briefcase in his hand, and felt something drop through him. In the lounge his sons were standing shoulder to shoulder with their arms crossed, and in front of them, holding a stuffed dinosaur against his chest like a life vest, was Delphine Cardinal's son. Toys everywhere. The good rug ruined. The boy's shoulders were up around his ears, and Delphine had her hand on Ezra's shoulder, not pulling him back, just resting there, and she was looking at the twins with an expression Adrian had never once managed in his life, which was patience with no softness in it whatsoever. "What are you doing?" Adrian said. It didn't come out as a question. It came out as a man throwing something. Miles didn't flinch. "Nothing, you went down to the ravine, in January. Alone." "He followed us," Everett said, and jerked his chin at Ezra, and it was such an obvious lie, so badly constructed, that Adrian understood immediately that his son had never had to lie well before. There had never been anyone in the house who cared enough to check. He looked at the small boy. He looked at the dinosaur, which was missing an eye and had been repaired at the tail with what appeared to be green fishing line. "Did they hurt you?" Ezra Cardinal looked back at him and said nothing. Not the sullen nothing of the twins. A different nothing. A nothing that had a floor to it. "He doesn't talk," Miles said, and there was something new in his voice, something Adrian couldn't place, and it took him 2 more days to identify it. And when he did, it kept him awake. "He walked all the way down," Everett said suddenly, in a rush, as if it were being pulled out of him. "It's steep. We told him it was scary and he went anyway." He stopped, he looked at the floor, he just went. Adrian turned to Delphine. He was ready to be furious at her, and it would have been so easy, and it would have solved nothing, and he felt the old machinery of blame start up in his chest, and he was still ashamed, 6 years later, of how close he came. "You were supposed to be watching them," he said. She let it sit in the air, let it sound as stupid as it was. "No, Mr. Fenwick," she said, "you were." Then she took the mop from beside the door, handed it to Miles Fenwick, handed a cloth to Everett, and went to make her son a cup of hot chocolate. Adrian stood in his own front hall while his sons cleaned the floor. Neither of them argued. He had shouted at them, bought them things, threatened boarding school, sat in silence with them at 3 separate restaurants. He had never once handed them a mop. That night he came upstairs at 11 to find Miles's bed empty. He found both boys on the floor of the guest room where Ezra napped on PA days, cross-legged on the carpet, and the small boy was showing them something in a shoebox. Adrian stopped in the hall with his hand on the doorframe. "That's his truck," Ezra said. His voice was small and clear, and it stopped Adrian's heart, because he had believed without ever being told that the child could not speak. "Your dad said." "He had a real one too, big one." A pause. "He worked up north. He drove for the mine at Fort McMurray, and then he came back and he was going to drive for the city here instead so he'd be home." Another pause. "The kind that has weather in it. The highway was bad." Silence. Adrian did not breathe. "How long ago?" Miles said, and his voice cracked in the middle of it. 2 Christmases. Miles stopped. "Start again." "Does it stop?" "The thing where you wake up and you forget for like 1 second and then you remember?" "No," Ezra said. Adrian shut his eyes. "But it gets shorter," the small boy said. "The remembering part. It used to be all day. Now it's just when I wake up and sometimes at the pool because he taught me to swim." Nobody said anything for a while. Then Everett Fenwick, 10 years old, who had put ice in a woman's boots and had not cried in front of another human being since he was 7, said in a completely ordinary voice, "Our mom's not dead. She just lives in Switzerland." And Ezra said, "That's worse." Adrian went down to the kitchen and sat in the dark for a long time. Delphine came in at 7 the next morning to find him still at the table in yesterday's shirt with a cold cup of coffee in front of him. She hung her parka on the hook by the mudroom door. She had never once used the front hall closet, and it had never occurred to him to tell her she could. And she said nothing, and she put the kettle on. "He talks," Adrian said. Her hands went still on the counter. "To them," he said. "Last night. I heard him." She turned around. Her face did something complicated and quick that he had no right to be watching. "He stopped for 9 months," she said. "After my husband. Not a word, not to me, not to his teachers, not to the therapist the school found us, who was very kind and cost more than I make in a week. Then in the spring he started up again. But only with me. Only at home." She wiped her hands on the towel and he saw that they were shaking. "He has not spoken to another person outside our apartment in 2 years, Mr. Fenwick. Not one." "Then why?" "Because your sons are drowning," she said, "and he can see it. He can see it the way you'd see a fire. He's been in the water, he knows what it looks like from underneath." The kettle began very quietly to sing. "I told you I don't do childcare," she said. "I meant it. I'm not going to raise your children. I have one child and he takes everything I have." She looked at him steadily. "But I'm not going to stop Ezra from being in that room either. That's the first time in 2 years he's chosen anybody." Something happened in the house after that. Not a transformation. Adrian distrusted then and now, the version of this story where love arrives on a Thursday and the boys are cured by Sunday. What happened was smaller and slower and much harder. The twins stopped waiting for Ezra to leave. They started waiting for him to arrive. Tuesdays and Thursdays they'd be at the front window from 3 onward, breathing on the glass, pretending they weren't. They taught him to shoot a puck against the garage wall, and when he was too small to lift the stick, they cut one down with a hacksaw from the garden shed and taped the blade badly and were fiercely proud of it. Ezra fell down constantly. He never once cried about it. Miles started carrying an extra pair of mitts in his coat. And Ezra, in the way of 6-year-olds, asked the questions no adult in 14 months had dared. "Which one of you cries?" Adrian heard him ask from the hallway, standing frozen with a stack of files under his arm. "Neither," said Miles. "Him," said Everett. "Shut up, me," said Everett, and then after a moment both. Adrian went into his study and closed the door and put his head in his hands. He started coming home, not always, not even usually at first. But he moved the Halifax meetings to video calls and took the Friday flights on Saturday morning instead. And he began to learn things about his sons that he should have learned when they were 4. That Everett could not eat anything with cinnamon in it. That Miles hummed when he was concentrating and denied it under oath. That they both slept with their bedroom doors open exactly 6 inches, and had done since the night their mother's car went down the driveway for the last time. He learned that the ravine fort existed. He was not shown it. He learned it by finding a snow shovel in the wrong place. And in the 3rd week of February, Vivian Fenwick came back to Toronto. She arrived at the house at 10 in the morning in a car she had hired, and she sat in the living room with her coat still on. And she was still in a way Adrian found bewildering. One of the most graceful people he had ever met. She had been a cellist before she was anything else. He had married her for the way she held her wrists. 8 nannies, Vivian Fenwick said. In a year, 14 months. Do you hear yourself? He did actually, that was the trouble. He heard himself constantly now. You left, he said. And you never came home, she said. And I want to be very clear that both of those things are true, Adrian, and only one of them is going to be examined in that courtroom. She took off one glove, finger by finger. I have a house on the lake in Coligny. I have a husband who is home at 6. I have a school that has agreed to take them in September. I am not the villain of this. You didn't call them. 11 months. Her hand stopped. I called, she said. They'd have told me. I called. And here her voice did something he had never heard it do. Not in 18 years. Not when her father died. It went ragged. I called every Sunday for 4 months, and Miles wouldn't come to the phone, and Everett would come and hold the receiver and breathe and not speak, and then one Sunday he said, don't do this to us anymore, and he was 9 years old, Adrian. He was 9, and after that She stopped. She put the glove back on. You may hold that against me, everyone does. I hold it against myself at 4 o'clock every morning of my life. They sat in the wreckage of that for a while. She left an hour later. On the way out she paused in the front hall, where Delphine was on her knees, fitting a new felt pad to the leg of the hall table. And Vivian Fenwick looked at her for a moment too long, and Adrian saw the whole calculation move behind her eyes, and he opened his mouth to say something and didn't. That was the second time he was a coward. He would only get one more. The watch went missing on the 29th of February. It was his father's, a Rolex Datagest, 1968, scratched to hell, worth perhaps $8,000 and worth nothing at all. And Adrian had kept it in the drawer of the hall table since the funeral because he couldn't wear it and couldn't put it away. Rosemary Fenwick noticed it was gone. Because Rosemary Fenwick noticed everything. And she stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, and said the sentence Adrian had been dreading since the day he hired a woman with a canvas bag and a quiet child. When exactly did she start? Mother, I'm not saying a word. I'm asking a chronology. She has been in this house for 11 weeks and every single thing in it is exactly where it was, except the watch. Delphine was standing in the doorway with a basket of laundry against her hip. Adrian did not know how long she'd been there. Long enough. Her face was completely still, and he recognized the stillness, because he'd seen it on the first day when she stood in his hall and refused to look at the chandelier. "Would you like to check my bag?" she said. "Don't be ridiculous," said Rosemary Fenwick in a tone that meant yes. And here is the part Adrian Fenwick has never been able to explain. Not to his sons, not to himself, he hesitated. Not for long. Perhaps 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds he saw the courtroom, and paragraph 9, and a lawyer in Geneva saying he also employed a woman who was investigated for theft. And he waited, he actually waited, and Delphine Cardinal watched him do it. Then he said, "No one is checking anyone's bag, it's my house, I lost it, that's all." But she had seen the 3 seconds. She set the laundry basket down on the kitchen table, and she said very politely, "I'll finish out the week," and she went to get her son. He didn't chase her. He told himself he'd fix it Monday, he told himself she'd cool off. He was very good at telling himself things. It was the core competency of his entire adult life. The storm came Sunday. 26 centimeters, the kind of dump that shuts the 401 and turns the ravine into a white throat, and Adrian was on a call with Halifax at 4:30 when he realized the house had gone wrong. Not quiet. The house was always quiet wrong. He climbed the stairs and pushed open the door of the twins' room and the beds were made, which had never happened, not once, and on Miles's pillow was a piece of foolscap that said in blue pen, "We are going to Mom, don't call the police. It's not Delphine's fault about the watch. We took it to sell for the plane." Under it in Everett's rounder hand, "Sorry about the rug." He does not remember going down the stairs. He remembers standing in the driveway in loafers, shouting their names into snow that took the sound and swallowed it whole. He remembers the streetlights coming on at 5 o'clock, orange, useless. He remembers dialing 911 and then, before it connected, hanging up and dialing a number in Scarborough he had never called before in his. She picked up on the second ring. "They're gone," he said. "In this. They left a note, they're going to the airport, they took the watch." His voice went, "Delphine, they took the watch to sell it, they've had it since Thursday, and I let you walk out of my house." There was a rustle. A muffled sound, a small voice underneath. "Ezra wants to talk to you," she said. And then the boy's voice, high and certain. And Adrian had to sit down on the frozen step. "They're not going to the airport," Ezra Cardinal said. "They said the airport was too far and they didn't have enough. They're at the fort. They're waiting for it to get dark so they can walk to the bus." "Where's the fort?" "Ezra, where is it?" "Down where the creek turns, under the big tree that fell." A breath. "It leaks." He went down into the ravine with a flashlight from the mudroom, and the snow was up over his knees in the hollows, and he fell twice, and the second time he lay in it for a moment thinking with strange clarity. "This is what they did on a Tuesday afternoon, and I shouted at them about the rug." He found the fallen tree at 5:40. He found the tarp under it staked down with hockey sticks. He found his sons wrapped together in a sleeping bag that had been in the cottage shed since 2011. And Everett was crying and Miles was not. Miles was holding his brother, and staring at the tarp with his jaw locked, because somebody in that family had to be the one who didn't. And when the flashlight hit them, Miles said, in a voice much too calm, "He's really cold, Dad. I couldn't get him warm." Everett spent the night at Sick Kids with a core temperature of 34.1 and mild frostnip on 2 fingers. Miles refused to leave the chair beside the bed and refused a blanket and finally fell asleep sitting up with his boots on at 1 in the morning. And Adrian, who had not prayed since he was 9, prayed. At 4 a.m., he went down to the vending machines on the second floor and found Delphine Cardinal sitting on a bench in the corridor in her concrete-colored parka, her sleeping son across her lap, the one-eyed dinosaur under his chin. "You didn't have to come, I know." He sat down. There was a long silence full of the sound of the hospital, that particular hum. "I hesitated," he said. "Yes, I'm not going to tell you I didn't." "That's something," she said. He put his face in his hands. 8 nannies, he said into his palms. 8. And I sat in my office and I thought, what is wrong with these children? Not once. Not one single time in 14 months did I think. He stopped. Delphine looked down at her son's face. She adjusted the dinosaur. When she spoke, her voice was low so as not to wake him, and it was the least gentle kindness Adrian had ever been shown. "After my husband died," she said, "I couldn't be in the room with Ezra. I fed him, I dressed him. I could not look at him, because he has his father's hands, and every time I saw them I lost the man again. 9 months he didn't speak, and I told everyone it was the accident." She breathed out. "It was not only the accident. There was a house with a mother in it who was not there. I know exactly what I did to my son, and I know it because I did it while standing 3 feet away from him. You did it from an office tower. It's not a different sin, Mr. Fenwick, it's the same sin with a better view." He wept then, quietly in a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning, 44 years old. "Then how do you?" He couldn't finish it. "You go into the room," she said. "That's all, that's the entire thing. Everyone wants it to be a technique." She almost smiled. "You go into the room and you say the true thing out loud, And then you come back the next day and do it again. And you do it about 900 times, and one day they believe you. At 6 in the morning Everett woke up and asked for his brother. And then he asked, in a small voice, whether the dinosaur could stay. And Ezra Cardinal, 6 years old, walked the length of a hospital room in his socks and put it in the bed and said, "He's for scared, you can have him till you're not." Adrian stood in the doorway with his hand over his mouth. The custody hearing was on the 11th of April, at 361 University Avenue, and he had been preparing for it since December the way he prepared for a hostel board, with binders. Hugh Marchetti had built him a case. It was a good case. It included the 11 unanswered Sundays and a psychologist's letter, and a detailed accounting of a certain private banking husband's second bankruptcy in 2009, and Marchetti laid it all out on the table in the boardroom 2 nights before and said, "This will win." Adrian looked at it for a long time. "Will it?" he said, "or will it just make her lose?" Marchetti, who had been doing this for 31 years, set down his pen. In the courtroom Adrian sat with his hands flat on his knees while Vivienne Fenwick's counsel spoke about instability, and 8 nannies, and a man who had spent 140 nights out of the country in a single year. Every word of it was true. He had checked. He had gone back through his own calendar with a pen, night by night, and it was worse than they knew. It was 152. When it was his turn, he stood up and did not open the binder. "My ex-wife phoned our sons every Sunday for 4 months, he said, "and I did not know that because I was not there to answer the phone. Her lawyers say I provided an unstable home. I did. Their mother left and I responded by hiring 8 strangers, and I want the court to understand that I did not hire them because I couldn't manage the boys. I hired them because I could not be in a room with 2 children, who looked at me and asked, without asking, whether I was going next." The room was very quiet. "There is a woman named Delphine Cardinal who cleans my house," he said. "She refused from the first day to raise my children. She was the only honest person I've employed in 14 months. Her son is 6 years old and hasn't spoken to a stranger in 2 years. And in January he sat down on my ruined rug in front of 2 boys who had gone down into a ravine hoping somebody would come looking for them. And he told them the truth about his father, and they told him the truth about their mother. And I stood in the hallway and listened, and it was the first time since the separation that anyone in my house had said a true thing out loud." He looked at Vivienne Fenwick. She was very white. "I'm not asking this court to take my sons away from their mother," he said. "I'm asking it not to take their mother away from them a second time. And I'm asking for a schedule I can actually keep, and I have signed something with my board reducing my travel, and it's in the binder. And I would like it noted that I don't consider that a sacrifice. I consider it a bill that came due." The justice granted joint custody. The boys stayed in Toronto, in the school they'd been suspended from and readmitted to, and they went to Geneva for July. And Vivienne Fenwick came to Toronto for a week every second month and stayed at a hotel on Avenue Road, and it was awkward for 2 years and then it was less awkward. And one, at a hockey tournament in Whitby, Adrian watched his ex-wife scream at a referee in French and thought, God help him, that she was magnificent. In the corridor outside the courtroom she stopped him. "You could have used the phone calls," she said. "Marchetti had the psychologist's letter. I saw it in disclosure." "Yes, why didn't you?" He thought about a woman on a bench at 4 in the morning with a sleeping boy across her knees. "Because they'd have found out eventually," he said, "and I've spent 14 months teaching them that adults leave. I'm not going to teach them that adults win." The watch turned up in April in the fort, in a Ziploc bag inside a coffee tin, along with $62 in coins and a hand-drawn map of the Toronto subway with the airport marked in the wrong place entirely, which is the detail that undid him. That his sons had been prepared to walk out into a snowstorm, with a plan that could never have worked, because the plan was never really the point. Rosemary Fenwick drove out to Scarborough on a Saturday in May and sat in Delphine Cardinal's kitchen, and apologized for 11 minutes without stopping, and Delphine let her, and then gave her tea, and they have, improbably, been friendly ever since, in the way of 2 women who both know exactly what they are capable of thinking. Delphine did come back, not as a housekeeper. She'd been carrying in the canvas bag the same paperwork for 3 years. A nursing license from Saskatchewan that Ontario would recognize, if she completed a bridging program she could not afford and could not attend while cleaning houses. Adrian offered to pay for it and she said no, flatly, and then she said, "You can loan it to me," and she wrote out terms on the back of a grocery receipt at his kitchen table, 4% 60 months, and she paid it off in 41 and framed the receipt. She is a pediatric nurse at a hospital in the East End. Her son is 13 now. He talks constantly. Everyone who meets him finds this funny, except Adrian, who has to leave the room sometimes. Miles Fenwick is 16 and taller than his father and hums when he concentrates and still denies it. Everett Fenwick has 2 fingers that go white in the cold and a scar of a memory he can discuss now, mostly, and he wants to be a doctor, which nobody in the family believes is a coincidence. The dinosaur lives on the shelf in the guest room, repaired at the tail with green fishing line, missing one eye. Ezra never asked for it back. Everett never offered, and Adrian Fenwick, who once believed that his sons were difficult, still keeps a note in his wallet on foolscap that says sorry about the rug and takes it out sometimes on airplanes, on the very few nights a year he is not home, to remind himself of what he almost mistook for a discipline problem. Two boys standing at the top of a staircase in the dark, watching a woman carry her frozen boots out the door, asking the only question they had ever known how to ask. Not what can we get away with? How long before you go too? It took 900 nights of walking into the room to answer it. He is still answering it. He intends to keep answering it until he is no longer able to climb the stairs.